Prior to the rule of Oba Oronyo, around the 13th century, the Benin Kingdom was under the rule of the Ogisors. Then, it was known as Igodomigodo, with Ubekun as the capital, until Ogisoere moved the capital to Umundurum. However, the Idu people, now known as Edo, were not satisfied with the rule of the Ogisors, so they invited Prince Oronyo, also known as Oromio of Ile-Ife, to rule over them. After some years, Oronyo left his son Eweka to rule over the kingdom, while he left to establish another kingdom known as Oyo, which later became a powerful empire in the 17th century. Oba Eweka would establish the kingdom and rule until his death. 11 other princes would succeed him until Oba Ewuare became king around the year 1440 and expanded the kingdom. It was during his reign that the Benin Kingdom reached its height. Oba Ewuare authorized the nationwide construction of hundreds of walls around the kingdom to separate the lands into district areas based on the kind of trade that would be carried out there. His idea ensured that from the exterior to the interior, his kingdom would remain properly secured. Ewuare also made foreign investments to fund the rebuilding of his city, which had been destroyed during the civil war with his predecessor. The Uzama, a group of hereditary chiefs in the Benin Kingdom, held the power to ordain and limit the power of the king. However, Ewuare restricted their powers and empowered his trusted allies. This way, he prevented any uprising or coup throughout his reign and created a new line of succession to the throne. Oba Ewuare not only succeeded in creating a new line of succession, but he also built a strong economy and security around his borders. His achievements led the people and city into a golden age era, making the Benin Kingdom famous for its ivory, bronze, and sculptures, where a majority are still displayed in British museums today. For nearly 200 years, Portugal dominated world trade as a result of the technological and cultural advantages it possessed. In the 1440s, the Portuguese sent out explorers on voyages to the east to search for a new sea route. It was during one of their explorations that Roy de Sequeira, a Portuguese sailor, reached the Bight of Benin. Sequeira arrived at Benin during the reign of Oba Ewuare in 1472. He gathered information about the kingdom and saw for himself the rich African monarchical system of the Benin Kingdom. Ewuare at the time was focused on the rebuilding and restructuring of his kingdom and paid no interest to foreign visitors during his lifetime. Therefore, no serious contact was made with the kingdom until 1486, when the Portuguese sailor and explorer John Afonso de Aveiro visited Oba Ozulua. Contrary to Oba Ewuare, who was focused on the internal affairs of his kingdom and paid no interest to visitors like Sequeira, Oba Ozulua welcomed Afonso de Aveiro. He allowed the Portuguese to trade slaves and other goods that might interest them. Ozulua had been described as the first Oba of Benin who received the Europeans in his kingdom. Although Sequeira was the first Portuguese to visit Benin in 1472, he was unable to establish any serious contact, as Ewuare, the king at the time, was focused on the domestic affairs of the kingdom rather than receiving visitors. However, Afonso de Aveiro was able to establish contact with the Benin Kingdom. There are several reasons why John Afonso de Aveiro is more publicized and recognized by scholars. First, Afonso de Aveiro came into the Benin Kingdom with the full support of King John II, the new king of Portugal, who had ascended the throne in 1481. The king had good reports about the existence of the Benin Kingdom and its structures and sent de Aveiro to garner more information about the kingdom. Second, Oba Ozulua was interested in receiving visitors and carrying out trade with them. He was able to trade slaves and other products with the Portuguese. He sent Ohen Okun, the chief of Ogotun, with John Afonso de Aveiro to meet with the King of Portugal to properly discuss the new trade relations. Ohen Okun was the chief of Ogotun and the chief priest of the Oloku temple. He was a direct descendant of Prince Ekalidera, the only child of Ogiso Owodu, the last Ogiso of the Ogiso dynasty in the 11th century. Ogotun, a village and a port in the Benin Kingdom, was the place through which the Portuguese voyaged into the city. Ohen Okun served as an ambassador under the reign of Oba Ozulua and Oba Esige. He was chosen as an ambassador as he possessed the qualities. According to Roy de Pina, he was a man of wisdom and eloquent speech. These are the reasons why most scholars disregard Roy de Sequeira's visit in 1472 and revere John Afonso de Aveiro's visit to the Benin Kingdom. The international trade relation between the Europeans and the Benin Kingdom started around the 15th century. The basic purpose of the international relationship that Benin had with the Portuguese, Dutch, French, and British was mostly trading. Other reasons included Christianity and diplomatic relations. From the very first trade relations, the Europeans needed slaves. It was at the port in Guato, also known as Ugotun, which was a slave factory, that they purchased their first largest volume of slave. The English ships came and purchased slaves from the seaport during the slave trade period. These first set of slaves were criminals who had been marked as outcasts. Originally, pepper was the only item that encouraged trade relationships between Benin and the Europeans. The Portuguese sought a particular variety of pepper that could compete with the Indian spice. The pepper found in Benin was provided to be satisfactory and fit the need of the Portuguese. The Oba of Benin was also ready to sell the pepper to them. Aside from the slave and pepper trade, the European traders also purchased ivory, which they sold to English colonies in the West Indies and North America. On their return, they would carry colonial produce from these colonies. English ships from Liverpool, England, came to buy slaves from the Benin Kingdom. Most of these English ships belonged to private traders. They bought it twice the price the Dutch offered. Existing records say that about 5 ships came from Liverpool in 1752 to Benin to buy about 1,280 slaves. Portugal in the mid-16th century, the Netherlands in the late 16th to early 18th century, and Britain in the mid-18th to 19th century were all influential European powers in the Benin Kingdom. There were also the French, Germans, and other Europeans. Manillas and brass bracelets were the popular forms of money used in the slave trade. In 1506, slaves cost about 12 to 15 manillas. The price rose to 57 manillas in 1517. Cowrie shells later replaced manillas after the 1520s. In the mid-17th to 18th century, slaves became the primary goods purchased by the Europeans. Male prisoners and some of the Benin citizens were sold, unlike in the late 16th to 17th century, when Benin never sold its citizens but foreign captives, inclusive of Ijaw, Igbo, Sobo, and others. In a year, Benin supplied an estimated amount of about 3,000 slaves. In the late 16th century, other European nations aside from the Portuguese became interested in West Africa. They included the Dutch, the French, and the British. The British attempted to lessen the Oba's influence on trade. They invaded and conquered the kingdom. They captured the Oba of Benin and carted away sculptures and works of ivory and brass. Some of the artworks the British plundered had been kept in the king's palace. They were made between 1550 and 1650. The institution of slavery had been in existence prior to the exploration of African societies by the Europeans. The diversity in the treatment and use of slaves has over the years transformed in comparison to when this institution started. Slavery as an institution became more prevalent from the 16th century onwards. However, alternative forms of this institution had been in existence. One of such alternative was pawnship, the offering of one of the children of the head of a family to a creditor until the debt is paid off. Slaves had several functions which they performed, and in some societies even became an integral part of the development of such societies. The emergence of the Portuguese on the coast of West Africa engendered the plundering of African society even further by the Europeans. The Portuguese were the first set of Europeans to set foot on West African soil and had established a trading station on the coast of Guato, which came to be known as the port of Benin City in 1480. However, trade between Europeans and Africans initially centered on luxury goods such as textiles, pepper, and gold. Slaves only became an important aspect of the trade when plantation labor was established by the Americans in the 16th century. The demand for slavery was on the rise in the first half of the 16th century, and between 1600 and 1800, the port of the Bight of Benin had shipped out about 1.5 million slaves. Over 1.2 million of these enslaved Africans were sold in the 18th century alone. By the late 18th century, the European economies began to shift from agriculture to industrialization, and the clamor for the abolition of the slave trade began in earnest. In 1807, the British Parliament passed the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act, which ended the buying and selling of enslaved people within the British Empire. However, around this period, Usman Dan Fodio, the pioneer of the Sokoto Caliphate, was waging jihad across present-day northern Nigeria. More on that in our next episode.